Mr. Anderson. Welcome to our studio. It's an honor to interview and to have you here in our Живе TV studio, which functions thanks to the generous support of the Knights of Columbus. So, my first question, Mr. Anderson, can you tell our viewers a brief history of the Knights of Columbus, the largest Catholic fraternal organization? I'm sure a lot of our viewers right now wonder why this strange, at least for Ukrainians, name, Knights of Columbus. What does Christopher Columbus have to do with the fraternal Catholic organization?
Well, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here and wonderful to be visiting Ukraine, which for me is the first time. So thank you very much for the invitation. The Knights of Columbus was founded by a young priest, Father Michael J. McGivney, in the basement of his church, St. Mary's in New Haven, Connecticut. And Father McGivney's parish was made up of recent immigrants to the United States from Ireland. So the problem he confronted in the 19th century was a working community of immigrants who found themselves in many ways in a hostile environment. Country was Protestant and was not very welcoming to Catholics. So Father McGivney had a choice. He could ask his parishioners to withdraw and, in a way, be in a ghetto, or they could move out into society and make a difference. And he chose for his parishioners to move out into society. And the vehicle he used was a men's organization which he founded called the Knights of Columbus, on the principles of charity and unity, a brotherhood of Catholic men who, unlike a religious brotherhood, had families, had jobs, had to go into the culture in their community and work and make a difference. Now, why Christopher Columbus? Well, again, Catholics were by and large an immigrant group, kind of seen as outsiders, and so the founders of the Knights of Columbus decided, who was the first one to come to America? Christopher Columbus. And he was a Catholic. So Catholics are not coming from outside. Catholics have been in America from the very beginning. And that's why they chose Columbus. Also, Columbus was seen in America as a great hero and an important Catholic who saw his role in many ways as bringing the gospel, bringing Christianity to a new world. And for him, his name Christopher, Christ bearer, had a real meaning for him. And so that's the reason Knights of Columbus chose the name Columbus.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining this relation of the Knights of Columbus to Christopher Columbus. And now let's go back to the word knights. We know from history that knights were not just armed men, but men, I would say, armed with the higher principles, devoted to higher principles. So what are the main principles of the order? Is there any principle that you think is more important than the others for modern Catholic men?
Well, many of the founders of the Knights of Columbus, the first men who came together, actually were veterans of the American Civil War. So they understood the military, they understood military values, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to have a brotherhood, and to care and protect each other. So that was part of the reason. The other part of the reason was knights historically stand for virtue. They stand for justice. They stand for helping those in need and defending those who cannot defend themselves. So Knights of Columbus wanted to capture this idea as well. The Catholic men are called to something higher. They're called to virtue. They're called to be men of justice and men of compassion to help those in need. So those two ideas.
Right. Now, every organization has its history, and behind every history there is a story, a personal story. So do you remember how did you personally join the Knights of Columbus? And probably even more important questions, why did you become a knight? What does belonging to this global fraternal organization mean personally to you?
Well, I joined the Knights of Columbus in somewhat of an unusual fashion. At the time, I was working as an assistant to President Reagan at the White House, and I had arranged for the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus at that time to meet with President Reagan. And after the meeting, the Supreme Knight turned to me and he said, "Are you a member of the Knights of Columbus?" I said, "No, there was no council in my parish." He said, "Well, why don't you join?" So that's how I joined the Knights of Columbus. The reason, I think we have to understand that the life of the church in a community really lives through the parish. And so for a Catholic man, how do you make a contribution? How do you fulfill your responsibility? Well, you have a responsibility in your family. You have a responsibility in your employment. But you have a great responsibility for the life of your parish and connecting your family to the sacraments as they're lived in the parish. And so an organization that did that, and an organization that was committed to charity and unity and a sense of brotherhood in the community, those were all values and activities that really attracted me. And so that's really why I joined, and that's why I continued to be active.
You presided over the Knights of Columbus as Supreme Knight for over 20 years. Prior to that, you mentioned that you held high offices in Washington, D.C., including your service as Special Assistant to the President of the United States. Later on, you served as a professor at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Life. You also held a number of high offices at the Vatican. And in addition to that, you seem to be a happy husband and a father of 5 children. So can you tell us, what does it mean to be an accomplished Catholic man in modern society, in current circumstances, which are marked by great uncertainty, by a lack of purpose in life?
Well, let me say what my model is. I think that one is really called, and I saw this in the life of St. John Paul II, and I think you see it also in the lives of very dedicated and holy priests like his Beatitude here in Ukraine. A striving to be an authentic disciple. Someone once said, Jesus Christ has many admirers, but he has few followers. So thinking through in your life how to move from being an admirer to being truly a follower, and to do it in an authentic way so that you can make an authentic witness. And I think one of the things that was so important to me about St. John Paul II was that he understood and really taught that we help each other make that Christian life possible. And so that's really the meaning of the family. It's the meaning of marriage, evangelizing each other, husband and wife, helping each other on this journey we're all called to make. And that's why the parish is so important, and why brotherhood like the Knights of Columbus, which helps men, helps each other on that journey, I found to be so important. So I think, you know, it's something, as you look back on your life, you try more and more to be that authentic witness and to be that authentic follower. And you see that hopefully you grow in that effort, so that you look back at St. Augustine, who said, late have I loved thee, beauty ever ancient, ever new. So you try not to love that eternal beauty not too late in your life.
Let's go back to the year 2000, when you assumed responsibility as Supreme Knight. I was in my second year at the seminary, St. Basil's College in Connecticut, in Stamford, and I presume the world has changed a lot since that, hasn't it? So how do these changes affected your style of leadership? What do you consider to be your greatest achievements? What were the greatest challenges and probably the things you wanted to achieve but couldn't achieve? Could you tell a little bit more on that?
Well, I think I became Supreme Knight toward the end of 2000, and soon, the next year, 2001, we had 9/11, the terrible attack in the United States, and of course that changed everybody's life in America, and it certainly impacted how I saw my responsibility as Supreme Knight. So one of the things was how to make the Knights of Columbus even more effective in society, particularly at a time when we were seeing a clash of civilizations, the world becoming more and more violent. We had thought 1989, with the collapse of the Iron Curtain and freedom coming to so many countries in Europe, that we were moving into a new world. But then after 9/11, we saw that that new world was not going to be as peaceful as we had hoped. So that was one thing. And then how could we as Catholics support justice, support the right, and at the same time do it with compassion and with charity and with unity? So, for example, we began a program distributing wheelchairs to poor people around the world. Now we've given out more than 75,000 wheelchairs. But the first shipment of wheelchairs that we did was to Afghanistan. And they did not go to Christians, they did not go to Catholics, they went to Muslims in Afghanistan to show that at stake in our efforts really is charity and unity and brotherhood.
During your last year as Supreme Knight, a very important event took place, namely beatification of the founder of the Knights of Columbus, Father Michael J. McGivney. We know that the Knights have been praying for years for beatification of their founder, and it finally happened. Although the beatification mass was attended, unfortunately, by a limited number of people due to obvious reasons of pandemic restrictions worldwide. But what do you think is the significance of this beatification ceremony during the COVID times? And another question, what does the example of Father McGivney offer us today? Father McGivney, who himself died of pneumonia at the age of 38.
Well, let's see, two parts. First, the beatification of Father McGivney, and we're so grateful to Pope Francis for moving that forward for us. We had to make a decision. Should we move forward with the beatification during the pandemic and realize that very few people could be there in person, but many people could see it on television? Or should we wait a year or two? And we felt that the inspiration and the example of Father McGivney was so important to Knights of Columbus and to others around the world that we wanted to do this as soon as possible. Now, Father McGivney was the oldest of 13 children, 6 of whom died in infancy. Then when he was in seminary, he had to leave seminary because his father died, and he had to go back and help the family go through that tragedy. So Father McGivney knew the hardship of families. He knew the suffering that was caused by illness and injury, and he worked very hard. Father McGivney died at age 38, which was the average life expectancy in America for parish priests. And he died as the result of a pandemic that was going through the United States and Europe in 1890. So he died of pneumonia, but really, like so many patients from COVID-19 who die as a result of pneumonia. So Father McGivney, we think, is a great intercessor during this time of illness. And what was also very important was the miracle attributed to Father McGivney's intercession that led to his beatification. And Knights of Columbus have had, for the past more than 10 years, a program of putting the latest advanced ultrasound machines in counseling centers for pregnant women. And that machine, for many women thinking that they must have an abortion or they want to have an abortion, they see the ultrasound image of their child and they change their mind. I remember the story of one woman who came to the center and she said, I'm having this abortion. I'm only coming because my friends have talked me into it. And so I agreed to come, but don't try to convince me not to have the abortion because I've made up my mind. She looked at the ultrasound machine, and as she was watching the child, the baby turned and waved. And the woman went, I've got to keep my baby. So we have saved hundreds of thousands of children from abortion by just letting women see the reality and being able to push aside the lies that they're told by those that promote and support abortion. So, what does this have to do with Father McGivney? We had the case of a child who was diagnosed with ultrasound of a disease that was so fatal that the doctors told the parents, there's nothing we can do. In fact, the only thing we can do is treat the mother, but there's nothing we can do for your child, and because of the law in the United States now, we have to advise you that many people decide to have abortions in this circumstance. The father was a Knight of Columbus. The mother was very devout, prayed often to Father McGivney. And this child, that now the doctors were saying would not live, was the youngest of 13 children in the family. So they began a very intense prayer for many months for Father McGivney. Went on a pilgrimage with many other brother knights and their wives. They came praying for their child. Came back, did the ultrasound again, and the child was cured, and now is a little over 5 years old. So we thought that that was a great sign of the Lord's blessing, and also, in a way, a signal to us to keep going on the pro-life effort in both helping women who are facing that difficult choice, but also standing up and being a witness for what's right on the abortion issue and the right to life.
Wow, that's really amazing story, and these efforts for saving lives are really worth taking. Defending human life as a very high value in our society. But I would like to go back to the Supreme Convention in Baltimore, which was attended in 2018 by His Beatitude Sviatoslav Shevchuk, head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, who in his keynote address during that meeting said, and let me quote, "I entered a large, dimly lit banquet hall. Hotel personnel were busy setting up chairs, and nothing indicated that this would be a historic meeting with an important outcome. When I entered the room, I was introduced to a well-respected Catholic gentleman who told me that he was heading the largest Catholic fraternal organization in the world." You know, while listening to these words, I was struck by this phrase, "Nothing indicated that this would be a historic meeting." And yet, it was indeed a very special moment for bringing the Knights of Columbus to Ukraine. Do you recall that meeting? Why was it so significant?
Well, there were two very important conventions of the Knights of Columbus, our international convention. The one in Baltimore I remember very well, and the meeting that His Beatitude and I had during that occasion, and talked about the situation in Ukraine, the situation of the church, and the potential to really build a civilization that respected the dignity of every person in Ukraine, to build a new culture in Ukraine, and how Catholics could work together to do this. And so for me it was rather a historic convention because I got to know much better His Beatitude. The other convention that was very important took place in 2005 in Chicago. And that was a convention that we announced that we were going to begin Knights of Columbus in Poland. And that was the first country in Europe in which we would be active. And the homilist at our convention mass was His Beatitude, Cardinal Hussar. And he gave a tremendously emotional homily in which he talked about the history of Ukraine, talked about the suffering of so many people in Ukraine. And as he was speaking, I looked at the faces of our delegates, how moved they were. And he concluded by saying, we need to rebuild, we need renewal, and we need Catholic men in Ukraine to step forward and help us in this effort. And the devastation that we've suffered in the last 75 years has made a terrible scar and wound, and we need help to heal it, and we need an organization like the Knights of Columbus. So I decided right there, we have to do what we can to bring Knights of Columbus to Ukraine. So those two conventions with the Cardinal and the Archbishop were really historic.
It's an interesting observation that the Knights of Columbus are usually spread in the countries where a majority of population are Catholics. So in this respect, Ukraine is really rather an exception, right? Because even in comparison to Poland, where the Knights were established a few years earlier, or Lithuania, Ukraine is different, right? So my question is, why have you decided to go overseas, and why did you lay your eyes on Eastern Europe first and on Ukraine in particular? And what do you think, why should Ukrainian Catholics consider joining the Knights of Columbus nowadays?
Wow. You mentioned at the beginning of the program that I had some opportunities for service in the Vatican. And the more I watched St. John Paul II and his many trips around the world, he was really showing us that the universal Catholic Church, which we say in the Creed, truly is a global church. Knights of Columbus, of course, is named after a great explorer and traveler. And we had not really moved into a new country in over 100 years, the Knights of Columbus. So going to Poland was really a response to St. John Paul II. Then that seemed to be working quite well. And we had to think through what we saw as very important countries for the future of the world and the future of the Catholic Church. And so the two countries that I concluded were important in this regard, Ukraine, and I think the reasons for that are obvious, even though Catholics are a minority. And for the future of the Church in Asia would be Korea, where recent history shows that the Church in Korea, the Catholics in Korea, are the fastest growing Catholic community in the world. So although less than 10%, the future of Korea on the mainland of Asia, the Catholic Church in Korea is very important for what may happen in the next century regarding Asia. And I think what happens in Ukraine is tremendously important for what happens in the future of Europe. And so the Catholic Church has to be a part of that future. It has to influence that future. And so Knights of Columbus, if we can help in some small way, help build up the church here, that's what was behind it.
Right. Well, it was obviously a courageous decision, and I should say a risky decision, because you didn't know how it was going to end up, right? But still, you insisted on this move to go overseas, and we know that it worked out. So now let's talk about the Knights of Columbus in Ukraine. Providentially, the Knights in Ukraine were established just before the Maidan revolution, as we call it, the Revolution of Dignity. And the main challenges faced by Ukrainian councils obviously were related to the outbreak of war in eastern Ukraine. This war, unfortunately, is becoming more and more a silent and forgotten war in Europe. But it's not the case for the Knights of Columbus, however. Why? Because the Knights of Columbus, right from the annexation of Crimea in 2014, offered their substantial help to internally displaced persons and wounded soldiers. Could you specify how the Knights of Columbus helped people suffering the tragic consequences of the war in Ukraine, which is still going on?
I really believe that Knights of Columbus coming to Ukraine was providential, and we began to see that with the suffering and the heroism, Maidan, and what happened in Ukraine as a result of that. And I'm very proud that my brother Knights of Columbus in Ukraine participated, made a contribution to that, and I think an important contribution, helping those who were suffering at that time. Knights of Columbus has 4 principles: charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. So patriotism to us is very important. And as Catholics, we understand that every country, the citizens should love their country and should be patriotic and should be willing to defend their country and their culture. And so even though in the Knights of Columbus we come from different countries, we have different traditions, and we still in the 4th degree have a strong brotherhood. So when freedom is on the line, when our military is making great sacrifices to preserve freedom and to defend what is just, Knights of Columbus have historically supported that effort. And we supported it in the First World War, in the Second World War, in Korea and Vietnam, and what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere. And so I'm very pleased that we are helping those who have borne the burden, who have suffered. and whose families suffer as well. So this is a part of charity. It's a part of unity. It's a part of being a brother. It's part of being a patriot.
On July the 8th, 2021, in Lviv, there was a presentation of the Ukrainian translation of the book Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mother of the Civilization of Love, that you co-authored with Monsignor Chavez. These days, we also witnessed a presentation of this book in Kiev. What is the connection between Our Lady of Guadalupe and the Knights of Columbus? Why have you chosen this particular interesting title, Mother of Civilization of Love? And what do you think could be the message of Our Lady of Guadalupe for Ukrainian people?
Wow. Well, I think there are many messages with Our Lady of Guadalupe. Of course, she is the patroness of America and the Americas. St. John Paul II, when he came to the Western Hemisphere, he spoke about Our Lady of Guadalupe as the patroness of America and as the star of the new evangelization. They're very interesting because the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe is almost 500 years old. So how is she the star of a new evangelization? And I think part of the answer to that is at a time when in Western Europe Christianity seems to be in decline, and so many critics of Christianity say it's something of the past, and it's sort of a European invention that now finally Europe is disposing of. Our Lady of Guadalupe is a message to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, not in the appearance of a European. She didn't even speak a European language. She spoke an indigenous language to a native of the Americas, Juan Diego, and the imagery in her apparition, in the tilma, speaks volumes in the indigenous language through the symbolism on the tilma, on her dress, the way she appears. And so if she is today, when the church is becoming more and more global, she is really a message that this is not just for Europe. Certainly is for Europe, but not only for Europe, for every culture, for every society, for every people. And, of course, it's the message to Jesus through Mary. So that's her significance, I think, today. Now, why did we entitle the book Mother of the Civilization of Love? Because the first great clash of civilizations in the more or less modern world was the clash between Europe and the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And Our Lady of Guadalupe's message was a message of hope, a message of mercy, a message of reconciliation, and a message of unity and of overcoming this clash of civilizations. And we refer to the Western Hemisphere as the New World, but that's not because I think really Europeans discovered it. It was a new world for them in that sense. But it was a new world in the sense that the entire hemisphere influenced by the appearance of the Mother of God, and in that way built a new Christian culture.
Right. On August 15 this year, during the pilgrimage of Ukrainian Catholics in the United States to a famous pilgrimage site in Sloatsburg in the state of New York, you received the highest award of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the Order of the Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky. What does this award mean personally to you?
Well, I was very privileged and humbled by this. Of course, we have heroes of the church, and Archbishop Szeptycki was certainly that at a time when there was the tremendous effort to destroy the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church by one totalitarian regime and then another totalitarian regime. And to the miraculous, you could say miraculous survival and growth of the church, that the light could not be extinguished by the darkness. A lot of that is a result of his witness and his leadership. And so to be honored in his name with this kind of an award really meant a tremendous to me.
And finally, my final question. His Beatitude Lubomir Huzar, another hero of our times, who resigned from the high office of the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in 2011, at the press conference in Kiev announcing this decision, was asked by journalists, your Beatitude, and what now? What are you going to do? And there is this, his famous reply, saying, "I'm not going to sit on my hands." I hope you understand the phrase. In Ukrainian it sounds like this: "Я ще не вимурував піч, де міг би посидіти як старий чоловік." So let me ask you the same question, Mr. Anderson. What are you doing now that you are no longer Supreme Knight?
Well, you can see my hands. I'm not sitting on them, and I'm here. So I'm very grateful for the invitation. I think, of course, there is only one Supreme Knight, so we have a new Supreme Knight, and he will lead the Knights of Columbus, I think, brilliantly. And I will just look at what doors the Lord wishes to open for me, and when he does, I'll try to walk through them as best I can. But being here in Ukraine is one great example of that. I think there's so much that needs to be done and can be done. I remember Mother Teresa once at the consistory in which Cardinal O'Connor, the great Archbishop of New York, was created a cardinal, and as he was walking through St. Peter's, Mother Teresa kind of stopped him and said, "Give God permission." So if you give God permission to enter your life, to give you opportunities, it's been my experience, he certainly will.
Well, thank you so much for this interesting conversation. We are really happy to have you here with us in Ukraine, in Kiev. We wish you good health and God's choicest blessings. May God continue to bless you, your family, and the entire community of Brother Knights worldwide.
Thank you very much, and you too.